And we're back with more on Newstalk Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this midweek edition of the Mark Petronas Show. Very tragic incident in Burnaby, British Columbia. An RCMP member, a female police officer, stabbed to death while investigating a tent city. One of the homeless people at that area lunged at her, went at her with a knife. She was stabbed, and she has died. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. And you can't help but wonder what went wrong. I mean, apart from the fact that this psycho attacked her with a knife. I mean, was that a circumstance where an officer, I don't know, needed more backup? I don't know. And that's why we rely on expertise like Leo Knight, former police officer in Vancouver, a former RCMP officer. He's a journalist, has a terrific website, primetimecrime.com. He alerted to me to what happened at this tent city, and I'm happy to have him on the show, although these are terrible circumstances. Welcome to the show, Leo.
Thanks very much, Mark.
I realize that it's early days in terms of what we know and what we've been able to ascertain thus far. What can you tell us about this incident?
Well, as you say, excuse me, we don't know a whole lot at this point, Mark. It only happened a few hours ago. What we do know is that a female member, a uniformed member of the RCMP, was assisting a Burnaby bylaw officer, an enforcement officer, in something. They were investigating some kind of complaint in a homeless, a tent city, if you will. And Canada Way in Gilmore area of Burnaby. And somehow a knife was produced. The female member was stabbed. I have one source that tells me that the perp involved in this was shot, not fatally, and has been taken into custody. But again, details are still very sketchy, but we do know that the female member is dead.
And there's one story. This is in the Edmonton Sun. Tragic and horrific. Burnaby RCMP officer fatally stabbed at homeless camp. The Burnaby Mountie was stabbed and killed while assisting bylaw officers, as you mentioned. And as you also mentioned, the suspect was also shot and killed. And I guess they haven't yet to. Shortly they will release the name. Um, I
I don't
mean,
know. I don't know that he's been killed, Mark. That's
yeah, we don't
preliminary
know.
information.
We don't know.
My
Okay,
source says not killed. Another source says was killed, so we don't know yet for sure.
right. All right. What goes through the mind of an officer? You're going into something involving these homeless shelters, where
Well,
there are people there who are drugged up in some cases, others
totally, Mark.
mentally
These
ill.
homeless shelters are just the political left has allowed these things to occur, and it's not just in Burnaby. It's not just in Vancouver or in Victoria. It's everywhere. You go up and down the West Coast. In Oregon, you see it. You see it in San Francisco and Los Angeles. The political left, for whatever reason, refuses to deal with these people. These people typically have mental health problems. Typically, they're drug addicted. You add the two of them together, and you have very volatile situation. Now you add 50 to 100 of these people in an encampment, and you've got a tinderbox waiting to go off. It's ridiculous that this should even happen. I'm so angry at the politicians who handcuff the police when they try and deal with these people, uh, and allow these homeless shelters, these tent cities, to pop up and then flourish. They don't allow the police to do the job they're supposed to do. And in too many cases, a police will go into a situation like this, typically undermanned. There'll only be one person, and as in this case, working with a bylaw officer, who I might add is unarmed. Um, and the police officer dealing with this thing is assaulted, in this case, stabbed fatally. Uh, and these things just go on and on and on, and it's just perpetuated by these left-wing politicians. It's nuts. I don't understand as a society how we can have government-sanctioned lawlessness, because that's what this is.
And the lawlessness is due to what exactly? Lax justice policies. And now, of course, we've got the federal government with the full cooperation of the British Columbia government legalizing, moving towards liberalizing drug laws. And so it's no longer, or it won't be against the law to have small quantity of, say, heroin
Well, it's already
or
not
crystal
in
meth.
in BC, Mark. It's you know, they have these supposed supervised injection sites, where the dealers hang around the front doors and sell to people as they go in. And the police are again handcuffed. They can't do anything about it because it's a public health authority project. It's ridiculous. I don't understand why we as a society are patronizing these people. I don't understand. If you have a drug addiction, they should be dealt with. They should be contained until they're prepared to go into some sort of treatment, and then put in that treatment facility. If they have mental health issues, again, they should be treated, and if necessary, contained for the safety of the public. This type of thing is just, it's absolutely ridiculous, and Mark, and so preventable.
How could this have been prevented? I mean, and I realize it's
Why are
early
these people
days.
why are these people there? I mean, seriously, why are they there? I'll guarantee you this too. The person who stabbed that female member, I'll guarantee he's either on probation for the umpteenth time, or he's on some sort of parole. Uh, there's no doubt in my mind that there's going to be a long criminal record associated with this person, and the system simply will not deal with them. So they're turned out in the streets. They get into these tent cities, and let lawlessness prevail. And I just don't understand it. I don't accept it. And I think politicians really need to be held to account for this.
And yet, when police officers go into this circumstance where they know they're going to be facing people who are, in some cases, drug addicts, in other cases, there's mental illness involved, other issues,
This
chronic.
system, by the way, has a pet name for it. It's called dual diagnosis. That's a drug addict with mental health issues. Did they have mental health issues before the drugs, or were they on drugs before they had mental health issues? It's a chicken or the egg argument, but they're called dual diagnosis. And you would be surprised at the number of these people out and about on our streets in Canada.
And yet, if a police officer were to say, shoot and kill one of these people, uh, you got to figure that the left wing media would immediately jump on the officer
Oh, the
and
poor homeless,
victimize
the helpless
the
person.
person.
Yeah,
Right. I
absolutely.
mean, and so if you're a police officer, what goes through your mind? You're going into this situation. You know, you have to be
Well,
obviously mindful of your own protection and the protection of your partner. On the other hand, you also know that if you're quick on the trigger in terms of finding yourself in a situation and somebody ends up dead, one of these people, one of these homeless people ends up dead, it immediately becomes a cause célèbre for the left in particular, who will demonize the
oh,
officer in
yeah,
question. And
absolutely. You'll
I
you'll
mean,
hear
you know, we're
the lawyers from the BC Civil Liberties Association screaming from the ramparts. And this isn't the first incident of violence. Violence in these things is perennial. It's always happening. Whether there's police involvement or not. Police typically get involved after something has occurred. There's been Vancouver police just did a search of one homeless account and came up with a number of guns and knives and other weapons. Uh, you know, I can't even begin to express my anger at this incident because, as I say, Mark, it's so preventable. I don't understand why we have laws and then refuse to allow the police to enforce them, or the courts simply allow a revolving door on the front. They put people on probation on top of probation on top of probation, and it doesn't matter. They get arrested again, they appear in front of the court, and the court says, "Oh, you bad boy," but they'll release them on conditions yet again. They're always out on the streets when they should be in jail.
Have you noticed an increase in the number of officers murdered? I mean, there was the two in Innisfil, Ontario,
Yeah, just
officers
just last week.
murdered. That just that
And
just
we
happened.
don't
Two
even know
officers.
all the details in that one yet. Um, clearly that sounds like an ambush, which is the direct result, if I may add my own opinion in this, a direct result of the defund the police and the Black Lives Matter movement started post George Floyd. It sounds like a police ambush, or an ambush set up for responding police officers, but that's not unusual these days. We see them in the States. That's the first one I'm aware of in Canada in a number of years, but it still happened, and two officers are dead.
Absolutely. Our friend Joe Warmington wrote about it not that long ago. No such thing as routine police call. There's two more cops slain. A call to South Simcoe Police Service came from a grandmother who was asking her grandson, he removed from her home, was after causing a disturbance. I mean, normally you see a lot of these incidents politicized by the likes of the Trudeau regime, which wants to target legal gun owners no matter what. Obviously, in the case of this murder of the Burnaby officer, the RCMP member, that can't be used. This was a stabbing. But does it bother you that every time something happens, these horrible Trudeau sycophants immediately point fingers at legal gun owners and say it's their fault?
Well, it's absurd. It's absurd, Mark, and I don't know whether you're a gun advocate or not. I mean, something you and I have never discussed. But it's absolutely absurd that the Liberal government, targets lawful gun owners and tries to take away their rights, because there's gun violence in our cities. Well, the gun violence in the cities is caused by gangsters and gangbangers and dope dealers and dial-a-dopers, who are trying to control territory. They're feuding over this, that, or the other thing, and it's done with illegal weapons, which are typically smuggled over the border. And I might add that the most used corridor for smuggling guns into Canada is through a reserve in southeastern Ontario that straddles the U.S. Canada border, and most guns come in through there, and it's ridiculous. We have a situation in Canada where the inmates are running the asylum, and it's finally starting. I think the pendulum is starting to swing back the other way. We just saw the election on Saturday of Ken Sims in Vancouver, who defeated the incumbent mayor, the lefty Kennedy Stewart. Ken Sim, I believe his name is the first Asian Canadian mayor elected in British Columbia. He stood on a strong law enforcement support. He got the endorsement of the Vancouver Police Union. He's promising to add 100 police officers right away to the complement for the Vancouver Police, and he's promised to deal with these homeless encampments. Well, the people elected him almost at a 2-to-1 margin over the left-wing nutcase Kennedy Stewart.
And that's a tribute to those who finally woke up, I think, not only the lower mainland, but elsewhere in British Columbia, who finally said enough is enough.
Well, I
People
think we've
like
seen it
Aaron
in a
Gunn
number.
came out, and others
Well,
producing. You
Aaron
saw
Gunn,
the.
the
Go
video of
ahead.
Vancouver is dying.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was a well
talk about
done
that.
video, and that, if you want to see what the problem is in Canada in allowing the inmates to run the asylum, Well, watch that video. Aaron Gunn did a terrific job on it.
Leo Knight joining us on Saga 960, coming to us from beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. Although in Burnaby, we've seen the murder of an officer, an RCMP officer. What normally happens? Does Brenda Lucky come out and make a statement? Did somebody from her office make a statement? How does that work? I mean,
The commissioner's office undoubtedly will make a statement. It'll be the usual blather about how tragic it is and all of that sort of stuff. And of course, it is tragic, and fair enough that she should recognize it. Although I will say, I have yet to hear a statement from the commissioner's office on events of this morning.
are you surprised that it's taken that long?
Well, now I say this not knowing what the commissioner might have put out by way of a general broadcast email to all members. It goes to everybody who's got a rcmp-grc.gc.ca email. Has she sent that out yet? I do not know. She certainly, to my knowledge, has yet to make a public statement, although I would expect one before the day is over.
We spoke a little bit about this documentary, Vancouver is Dying. I believe they were headed for 1 million views, with the majority of them being in British Columbia. I mean, that's
Yeah,
stunning.
it is stunning, but I also bring your attention to our current attorney general in this province is a guy by the name of David Eby, who is a former lawyer for the BC Civil Liberties Association, BCCLA. He used to ride around on his bicycle in the same area of Vancouver that Aaron Gunn is talking about. And if the police were interacting with the citizen, he would jump in the middle. He'd jump off his bicycle and get in the middle between the citizen and the police officer, screaming at the police officer and telling the citizen they don't have to talk to police and all that. That's our attorney general in British Columbia right now.
A radical.
Total left wing lunatic.
I mean, could the BC NDP government be in trouble next time around? What message does it send to the
I,
province,
I,
to the provincial
I
government,
think
just to
you're
say,
right.
look, go talk
I
about
think you're
that?
right. If the election results in the city of Vancouver are any indicator, then yeah, I would be worried if I was part of the NDP government, of which you know that I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely. Understatement.
Yeah.
But I mean, what gives me some encouragement, Leo, is that the fact that a video like this, a movie which was just released not that long ago, I think a couple of weeks ago,
Oh, less than 2 weeks, I think. Yeah.
less than 2 weeks, already approaching 1 million views, may well have turned the tide and woke up enough people in British Columbia to have had a dramatic impact on the elections. And when I spoke with Angelo Isidoro, who was also involved in this production on a production basis, he said that there's no doubt that it did have an impact. That the culture war needs to change. That conservatives need to get in the game and producing more stuff like this. Don't
Well,
just leave it to the left.
yeah, but they can't just be polite and engage in political swordsmanship, as it were. They've got to call out the nonsense and call it what it is. Every time that it happens, the I believe anyway, the conservatives, not only in this province but in Canada, need to stand up and get outraged at it and speak up. Um, it's pointless to go and play little games in the houses of parliament, where they do question period that ask questions that are totally ignored by ministers and premiers. It's not enough. That's just political theater. They need to get up and they need to speak out and speak out loudly.
I know that you've done some work with True North. There is this announcement by Anthony Fury, who was most recently with the Sun Media, with Post Media.
Yeah, he
I
was a
worked
writer
with
for the Toronto Sun. Yeah.
and I worked with him back in the days of the late great Sun News Network. Let's listen to Anthony Furey's statement.
Hi, I'm Anthony Furey. For more than a decade, I've had the privilege of being involved with some of the biggest traditional media outlets in the country. But now I'm excited to share with you what I'm doing next, as I join Canada's fastest growing online news organization, True North, where I'll be their Vice President of Content and Editorial. True North was founded a few years ago with the mission of creating quality journalism for Canadians that stands out from the pack, that doesn't stick to the same old establishment ways of doing things. Now, it's no great secret to say that a lot of people are unhappy about the state of media today. They read supposedly unbiased stories that, right from the first sentence, are clearly pushing some sort of agenda. Increasingly, news coverage is about focusing on fringe, niche issues that, whatever you think of them, they don't really have much to do with the daily lives of most Canadians. And what about all those seemingly endless stories about how we're all supposed to be angry at some person or some organization and cancel them because of this ambiguous Facebook post that they made years ago that one person claims to be offended by? Give me a break. I mean, I can't believe there are outlets that still think doubling down on that sort of stuff is a winning proposition. But whatever, they can do what they've got to do because at True North, we're doing things differently. If you haven't checked us out before, please do over at www.tnc.news. We offer news stories, exclusive interviews, podcasts, and more from our slate of experienced journalists. We've got contributors who've worked all over the place at Post Media, at Chorus, at the Globe and Mail, you name it. But what brings us together is we believe in True North's mission. Our team is growing. We'll be bringing out even more exclusives, more Freedom of Information Act reports, and more news that you won't be able to find anywhere else. But we can't do it without you. You see, one thing news media really needs to step away from is talking down to people and trying to set the agenda for them. Instead, we need to be listening to people to learn about what's really going on out there so as to accurately report on the state of things. And as such, we think it's more important than ever to get news tips from you about what's happening in your community. So email me directly at anthony@truenorthcanada.com to tell us what's really going on. Now, if you do already follow True North and value what we do, please consider supporting us with a contribution. Right now, all of our content is free for all. There are no paywalls, and we hope to keep it that way for as long as possible. Oh, and if you're a journalist who likes what you're hearing, well, drop me a line. Like I said, we're growing. Thanks so much for tuning in.
All right, so there you go. Anthony Furey, who I thought was doing a pretty good job over at Post Media. Do you get the sense that he maybe getting off of a sinking ship? I mean, I don't want to say that about Post Media. We know that they've had their financial challenges, and we know that they rely in no small measure on government money. And let's say, I mean, if there's a change in government in Ottawa, well, guess what? A lot of those purse strings might be closed off to the media, and it wouldn't trouble me much at all if that were to happen. I mean, he seems to have a sense that the winds of change are blowing, and that it was time for him to move over to
Well, I think.
so-called alt media. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I worked with Anthony at True North. I worked there for a couple of years in getting everything going, and it's a very viable, credible news organization. And congratulations to Anthony on accepting that position and on seeing through the vision of Candace and Andrew and the rest of them at True North. Um, I couldn't help but notice today, just talking about this as a side issue, I suppose. But Andrew Coyne tweeted today how he was stunned at the news that the federal government spent $54 million developing the ArriveCan app. Stunned he was. Well, True North.
I mean, yeah, the federal government doesn't waste
Yeah,
money.
I mean,
How can that possibly happen?
independent media sources cracked this story a couple of weeks ago and have been talking about it. And suddenly, Andrew Coyne, the doyen of the Liberals, suddenly discovers it's a news story, that something's going on. Well, he's a couple of weeks out of date on this. But
Yeah, I think
that's
you're seeing
typical.
more
Where
and more of that.
independent media breaks a story, and then a week or two later, if the mainstream media can't absolutely ignore it, which is what they try to do, then they wind up chasing their tails trying to chase the story.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more of that. Now, in their minds, they're so arrogant that they think it's not a story unless they cover it. That's
Absolutely.
that's part of the mental
But
process
the
that's still in
reality,
place there.
the
It's not a story
reality,
unless they say it is.
yeah, the reality is that the media landscape is changing, Mark, and it's been going through almost death throes for the last 20 years. The days of stopping by your local news agent and picking up the morning paper on your way to work, those days are pretty much done. Most people get their news online these days. Um, when I say most people, I'm not talking about a small majority. Most people is a heavy majority of people get their news online. They go to places like True North or Rebel Media. They you know, social media even is a source of news. But what is not a source of news is your daily newspaper anymore. And they're scrambling trying to find ways to still make money. Most newsrooms in this environment today have trimmed back to virtually skeletal staffs. Um, they're all trying to figure out a way to survive. And independent media organizations like True North, like Rebel Media, uh, are on a winning note. They figured out how to do it, and they're doing it, and good on them.
Yeah, absolutely. I just when I look at a guy like that making a move, and I know he's a smart dude who knows which way the wind is blowing, I can't help but think that he's probably a little concerned about the future of post media, especially when so many of these organizations wouldn't survive without the government pipeline of cash.
No,
And
absolutely. I
so,
mean, if you look at their financial statements, they're leaking oil, and they have been for a number of years. I don't understand at this point in time how their business model can succeed without government largesse. That shouldn't be the case, but it certainly seems to be the case for a lot of them.
yeah, the problem is that the more money you take from government, the more beholden you get to
To
be to
government, of
that
course.
very same
You
government,
wind and you
and the
wind
more
up
your
car-
credibility. I mean,
and you wind
the
up
credibility.
carrying their water like
Yeah,
Andrew Coyne, the
and
aforementioned,
yeah, and from that, what do you lose? You lose the faith of those
and your
whom you rely
integrity.
on, your integrity. So you sell your soul to government in exchange for some money, but what you lose, of course, is the sense that you are a credible news organization. I think that really has suffered to
Yeah,
such a degree. And now we're really
absolutely.
seeing it with Trudeau now,
Yeah,
with these
absolutely.
the government. I mean, the
But
media
again,
is
I,
so much in the
again,
corner
I
of the
might
regime.
I might suggest that people go and find alternate news sources. You don't have to accept what the Globe and Mail says as gospel. God knows you don't have to accept what the Toronto Star says as gospel. They are so wrong so much of the time. And when you try and figure out where they're coming from, it becomes painfully obvious that they're coming from a very liberal left direction. And for the majority of Canadians who are primarily center politically, they're neither really left nor right, they're somewhere in the middle. That's just not good enough. As a news consumer, I want to be informed. I don't want to be preached to. I like opinion. I absolutely read a lot of them. I over the course of 30 years, I produced a lot of opinion journalism, and I'm proud of what I did. Um, and but that allows me to agree or disagree with a columnist. We know it's opinion, but when you find opinion creeping into what should be straight news reporting, that's where I have a huge problem. And we see that problem with the Globe and Mail. We see that problem with the Toronto Star. We're seeing encroaching into post media, and perhaps that's why folks like Anthony Fury have decided that there's a better way.
Yeah, I mean, why is the state broadcaster wading into the area of opinion, going after Danielle Smith, attacking her? I
Oh,
mean, why are my tax dollars being used so that the public broadcaster can put an
and
opinion out there
not
to the
not
point where they're
just a
not saying
few
that,
tax dollars.
yeah,
$1.6 billion
isn't
go
that
to the
insane?
CBC every
Yeah,
year to
And Trudeau would
produce.
give them even more, and will give them even more
Well,
money given the chance.
if he could,
Disgusting.
he certainly would. You know,
Yeah.
and all that is is to get them to carry the liberals' water.
And they've been doing that, and the audience for CBC has gone
Yeah. Well,
down and
that's what,
down and down.
you look at folks like Pierre Poilievre, and one of
Yeah.
his platform planks is to defund the CBC. Well,
Yeah.
from that perspective alone, I hope he gets elected and does that.
Well, we'll see if he would do that. I mean, it's funny how your promises tend to change over the course of time. But I wouldn't say just defund the CBC. I'd defund all
Well, yeah,
the
but
so-called privates as well. They get hundreds
fund,
of millions of
funding
dollars
of
from the
funding of
taxpayer
other
now.
private media. Well, it's over $655 million last year.
It's lunacy. The broadcasters alone are getting over 100 million.
Yeah,
Leo, I got to wrap things up. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Maybe as we find out more and more about this murder in Burnaby, we can touch base a little later on if
sure.
if you're available. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Anytime, Mark.
Leo Knight, check out his stellar work in the pages of primetimecrime.com, coming to us from beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. Let's take a break, shall we? Back with more on Newstalk Saga 960 and the Mark Petronis Show after this.